Hey, this is Ben Eater. Welcome to Ben and Blue. So recently we released two episodes at the same time, episode 3 and episode 4, that were a bit different from each other. So one was a more focused and structured conversation on education, and the other was a bit more of a random conversation. We just kind of hit record and just talked about whatever came to mind. And we asked you for feedback on what you thought about each of those styles. And I have to say, I was really amazed by the number of just really thoughtful comments that many of you left on the subreddit, on YouTube. And I think it's really delightful to see that there are so many people who really genuinely want this podcast to succeed. So we'll talk more about that feedback and everything that we got a little bit later. But before we get into that, it turns out that Ben Stenhaug is back in the classroom. He's in teaching a class. And, as we've talked about in previous episodes, he's not particularly interested in lecturing during class, but he's not really quite sure what to do with himself. So in this episode, Grant and I have plenty of crazy ideas for him. So we'll kind of talk about that, see how that goes. And I'm actually really excited about this because it means we'll get to find out in future episodes what Stenhaug actually ends up doing, how he actually ends up teaching his class, and how it turns out. So let's dive in.
Hey, Eater, can you share some of the insightful directions you wanted to take episode 5?
I got nothing. Yeah, actually, I heard Stenhaug, you're starting to teach a class.
Yeah.
And thinking about potentially flipping that class. And I'm curious what that means.
There's a great story behind this and probably a lot of lessons that we can extract from this. Perhaps my number one goal coming to Stanford is to become good at data science. There's a few different maybe competing things, but becoming really good at data science is up near the top. And
So back up a second here, because I clearly don't know you that well.
Mm-hmm.
You went to Stanford, you're getting a PhD. I assumed it was in some sort of education-related thing.
It's in the education school.
Okay.
And I'm in a lab, a pocket of the education school. Maybe it's 15% of folks in the education school that are doing pretty quantitative work. And in particular, I'm working with a psychometrician who deals with all sorts of things, but one of the main things is how you assess measurements of learning on standardized tests. And so that's where the intersection of education and data science comes from.
Got it.
Alternatively, and I thought about doing this, I could have gone to a statistics or an economics PhD program and then had my field or my context that I go out and study be education. It was kind of statistics department, study education, or education's department, and focus on data science and statistics. And I chose education.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough.
So the main thing I wanted to get good at was R.
Mm-hmm.
I had taken this awesome R class, the Data Challenge Lab, which I talked about previously. And I meet a guy who also wants to take it, and I tell him all about it. We do a little bit of data work together, and he's like, "You're pretty good at this stuff." It's like, "Yeah, I took this class. It was really, really useful." And he says, "I teach a 1-unit course on SPSS and a 1-unit course on Stata, but I'm going to be graduating next year, and I need someone to take it over. You have prior teaching experience. You're clearly good at R and this stuff. Why don't you teach it?" And I say, okay. At that point in time, I'd never opened up SPSS in my life. I'd literally never double-clicked the icon. I'd had it on maybe one or two of the computers I'd owned in my life, but I'd never double-clicked the icon. And Stata I'd used a little bit. My R had been my expertise.
Well, a good way to learn something is to teach a class on it.
Oh, it's perfect. It's an amazing way. There's a background issue here, which is increasingly everyone in the education schools required to do some quantitative work. Even if you're a qualitative researcher and you want to know how students are reading and understand the mechanism of reading, you need to do some sort of quantitative study of that. No longer is it enough to just be a qualitative researcher.
You can't just write some blog post about what you think is working, what you think isn't.
You can't just summarize John Dewey and a bunch of other folks in a long form essay.
It has to be at least be a peer-reviewed blog post.
Of course.
All right, guys, lay off the academia. That's for another one. And so you have a ton of people who the modal person is someone who taught for 6 years. Maybe they majored in English or education in college, and then they wanted to go into research into academia for some reason. But this person, unlike people that would have gone into engineering or statistics or computer science or a bunch of the other programs at Stanford, really has no background in statistics or quantitative methods at all, to the point where, for example, the difference between a p-value and a correlation would be pretty difficult for many of these people, I think, just not as a function of how smart they are or anything, but just as a function of their background and what they've focused on.
Mm-hmm. So ostensibly this class is to teach them SPSS, which is the specific tool for doing statistical analysis. But in reality, it sounds like you need to teach them some basics of statistics to even get started. Is that?
Yeah, 100%. And they come in, and what ends up happening is their professor gives them some data set and says, hey, I want to study this about this data set. And oftentimes they don't know the statistics to do. And then they also don't know how to clean and manipulate and use Stata or SPSS to work around the data. And I don't know, maybe you guys haven't had this feeling, but being in a program like Stata or SPSS with a lot of messy data and having an outcome that you know you want to get to and having no idea which buttons to press to get there has got to be one of the worst feelings in the world.
Oh, it is. No, I have very vivid recollections of early dealings with R. And so actually I was in a context of like a data science internship that in a lot of ways I just wasn't qualified for, but it's like kind of learn more on the spot. And there are very few feelings out there worse than that just utter intimidation, overwhelming. All I want is for you to do one thing, and I have no idea where the relevant button is. So you have a classroom full of those.
Well, it sounds like it's even worse than that, right? Because you've got this data set, you've got folks that are not necessarily steeped in statistics. Perhaps they have a question that they want to ask of this data set, but they don't really maybe even know what tools are in the toolbox.
Yeah.
To even formulate the question, much less like then what?
So it's the deep end. And I'm describing the world before these classes, or if you didn't take these classes. And so what this 1-unit course ends up being is the professor's answer to the student coming and saying, hey, I want to do this quantitative stuff. I don't have the background. I need to build these skills. And the professor says, oh, well, we have these 2 courses, or these 3 courses. There's an R one as well that someone else teaches. Why don't you take that? That'll focus directly on this skill. And it's true. It's good. It focuses directly on the skill. But the problem is we have 10-week quarters here, and the class meets every other week. So 5 total times for an hour and 20 minutes each time. And so you multiply that out. It's a little bit over 6 hours of meeting time over the quarter. And how you're going to accomplish anything in that time is the challenge. And that's what I was trying to think about. And so the answer then was I've been making YouTube videos and having them watch those outside of class. And then in class, we do some sort of activity where they'll work in a group. I've instructed them to work as slow as the slowest person in the group so that they're working together. Everyone's typing on their own because I think it's important to type and be the one actually clicking because it's that muscle memory that's valuable. But it's about the activities. And my goal is literally just to get them to the point where they feel like they can learn on their own and they feel like they have a very basic idea of what to Google. Because I think even before that, you don't even have an idea of which program to open or what keywords to Google or anything like that. If I can get someone to the point where they feel confident in their ability to self-study, that seems like mission accomplished for a course that meets 5 times, total of 6 hours over the 10-week quarter.
Yeah, that's insane. I mean, I guess part of the challenge here, the reason you're making YouTube videos is you want to make it more than 6 hours of experience that they have with you, right?
Yeah, and it's a 1-unit course too, so you have to think about to what degree they have time for something like that. But yeah, it's a way of squeezing in more time, right?
Are you going to do anything kind of like optional extra meetings for those people who, even if it is a 1-unit thing, like I bet a lot of people in there genuinely want to learn this stuff. And once they discover that you're someone who's able to teach them it, are going to want all of the Stenhaug they can get.
So this is actually really funny. I told people off the cuff, I haven't said this to my actual classes. I think if you are in this position, SPSS and Stata are both, I'm just R guy through and through. So I don't think SPSS and Stata are the answer. And so I'm trying to start a club or some small gathering of people that get together and learn R and the Tidyverse and Hadley Wickham's packages in particular on Stanford's campus. And I think I would recommend that to these folks under any case other than the case that they're working with a professor who they're going to be emailing back and forth SPSS files with, or some lab where it's really important to be learning this. But if you are just choosing a data science program on your own, R is best because it's the most people are going to be using it. Python's maybe equally good. And then 2, I think it's just the easiest to learn and going to give you the most functionality for your learning curve.
So you've got a classroom full of folks who are showing up to learn SPSS, and you're just kind of like saying, yeah, that's nice. Glad you're here to learn that, but let me teach you R because that's better.
Well, I'm not actually teaching R, but I would. I would love to do that, actually.
So are you telling them they're wasting their time? What's the story here?
I've only said things when people have reached out asking if they should take the class. I'll express the opinion of R. I don't show up day one and say, welcome to SPSS. This program's garbage. Download R and go from there.
Man, one funny thing about the fact that you are someone who's familiar with like the broader context, but maybe not SPSS itself, is if you want to teach people the Google fluency and things like that, and just knowing how to learn the thing, are you going to be doing that during that 1 hour? Are you going to like be up there in front like, I actually don't know like if there's a good package for this. Let's like see if we can find one.
So you're questioning it. So in class, would you tell them the package or would you model the search?
Is your plan because you're just at the start of this, right?
I had my first hour and 20 minutes of being a Stanford teacher last week for the first time.
So is your plan that if you want to teach people this Google fluency, are you going to show them your own process of learning more about this tool that you just admitted you only opened up for the first time like not that long ago?
Yeah, I've been letting them in a little bit on that on the YouTube video, and then
you don't want to reveal. You don't.
No, I reveal. The world, I don't know SPSS, and I'm teaching it, but I think that makes me as good of a teacher as any other way. The first day, to get specific on the first day, so I planned this activity. It was very anticlimactic. We did an improv game at the beginning of class. I'm not kidding you.
We only have 6 precious hours for you to learn this like deeply technical tool that you're like in a desperate need for. Let's start off with a little bit of name ball.
So I said, all right, everyone stand up, let's make a circle, and then we're going to make a data mantra. So we're going to go around, everyone's going to say one word to contribute to the mantra, and we're going to try to say something. So I say data, the guy next to me says is, the next person, and it goes so on and so forth. It was a great use of classroom culture building time. And then everyone sits down, and I say, here's the tiny URL for the activity, work in your group, everyone types, go as slow as the slowest person, talk about why you're doing what you're doing. And I have 4 tables of 4 students. I think there's a little more than 16 people enrolled, but that's all that showed up on day one. And there's this time, and this goes back to an interesting active learning versus traditional lecturing thing. I do that and I release them. And then about 3 minutes later, I just realized I don't know what in God's green earth to do with myself. They're all just working on this activity. I'm just wandering around the room, screen peeking on people. Not sure what my role in the process is. And then occasionally someone will say, hey, where is this thing? How do I do this thing? And maybe I'll know and I'll point them, or maybe I won't know and we'll Google it together. And I do think that's a useful process. And I was pretty honest that say, I don't know this. Let's Google it. Oh, that looks too complicated. Let's not look at that. Oh, that looks good. Let's try that. Okay, it looks like that. That worked.
So do you have sort of projects? You said you kind of set out this project for everyone to work on. Is everyone working on the same project, or how is that working?
So this is interesting. Everyone this class period was working on the same project. Feels too grand of a term. It's designed to be done in the class period. So you're taking a data set, you're going to find the means of a couple of different things. You're going to use a t-test to see if they're statistically different. You're going to try to find a way to graph them. Maybe it's 2 box plots compared. See how why are the medians the same, but the means are different. Oh, the box plot shows the medians. That sort of thing. What came up was some students have their own data sets that we talked about. And so now my challenge is to think about how can I, because it's hard, right? How can I create some experience where they're learning SPSS or Stata on their own data set, but it's still structured enough and it's still guided enough where I can know the right answer or make sure they're not doing something wild or making sure it makes sense. Because it's easy when everyone's doing the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going with this, because you mentioned before that everyone was taking this class because they had some requirement to do some quantitative analysis of some data set. And presumably they were all kind of coming in with a question to answer about a particular data set that was maybe specific to their research or whatever it is they were trying to do. And that seems like the perfect way to learn something, is to come at it with a problem that you're invested in solving, and then having to discover for yourself, and hopefully with some supports if you're in a class, but having to discover for yourself, like, how do I do this? How do I solve this problem? How do I use these tools to solve this problem? And how can these tools potentially be used, and then hopefully you sort of learn how these tools can be transferred and used in other ways. But that's hard for you, right? Because everyone would be working on something completely different. You have no idea what it is. And I was curious if you were going to go that direction.
I mean, it's the challenge. I want to go there. And if you guys have suggestions, I'm going to keep thinking about this. But it's so easy to explain what a t-test is when I make a data set with one variable has 4 data points, the other variable has 4 data points. They're all integers. They're all already cleaned. And we say, hey, do we think the mean of these 4 data points is different than the mean of those 4? Like, could that be due to randomness? And we talk about it versus 16 people with CSVs, 122 variables wide, 16,000 rows long. Not sure what some of the variables are. There's characters. That seems so hard, especially when they might not even know the basics of what a t-test is. So I agree that's the perfect experience if you're sitting down one-on-one and figuring out how to do that 1-on-16. Could be really cool and could be really powerful, but it seems challenging.
I would actually push you here, Stenhaug, that you should err towards letting them run free. But the t-test example you bring up, like, here's a system where, an example where you have something that could be too complicated in their context and you want to expose it in a more simple one. That's what the videos are for, right? If you have this room where 16 different people are running free on the things that they came there to do and came there to learn, and one of them raises their hand, they come over, they're like, man, I'm really trying to figure out like how to do the t-test here, and it's unclear between my lack of an understanding of t-tests and my lack of an understanding of the actual program we're dealing with. At that point, if you have the video, you just kind of point them to it. You say, hey, if you want to learn about the actual statistics, this is the way to go. Raise your hand again. I'll come right back at you so we can help tackle this one together in your specific context. And while they're watching that video, you're off like answering someone else's question.
I think we all agree that the video is the great place to show the really basic, cleaned example and explain the basic intuition of the t-test where all of the other complexity is stripped away, right? That much is obvious. I think there's 2 options for in-class. One, what you're advocating for, Grant, which is the messy, everyone's doing their own individual project. Is that better, and super sincere open question, is that better than me making something slightly less messy and everyone's working on it at once and struggling together with this slightly contrived but still messy, maybe it's 75% of the way there from totally contrived video example to their own personal project? You get the benefit of people talking about the same thing together. I can go to the board and give a hint. And yeah, they're not working on their project, but this is only 6 hours total. They're not going to make that much progress on their own project anyways in that time. If I can build more learning through something slightly contrived that everyone's doing at the same time, maybe that's better. I'm not sure.
I don't see why they have to be mutually exclusive. I mean, you've got an hour and 20 minutes in that session. And if a full 40 minutes went towards the more structured work in groups on this well-established problem, and then at the end of that, maybe taking exactly what you just learned, maybe picking up where you did last time when you were halfway through the class, run with your own project. I'm here again for help. Is that just now robbing you of even more precious time, or would that be a meaningful compromise?
I love this structure we have in our mind now of 3 buckets, and I didn't have this very clearly before. 1, super contrived, isolated example. That goes in YouTube video. 2, slightly contrived but messy project. And then 3, you're absolutely in the wild, wild west with whatever data you happen to find off the internet or your professor emailed you or Dropboxed you. And those are the 3 things. And the 1 happens on the YouTube video, and then the other 2, we split up the hour and 20 minutes each 2 weeks and do. I think I can get behind that. Eater, what do you think?
I think the interesting thing about the latter case there with the data that you're bringing in is presumably there's some motivation tied to that. And I think that's important to have, a why behind why you're struggling with this. If you have some reason to sort of struggle and learn because you're trying to solve this problem, that's hugely motivating. So I see a ton of importance there. I do think the challenge, though, is that everyone is going to be at a different place on that. And how do you bring people together? And there is a ton of value in folks working together. Yeah, I think splitting it makes a ton of sense because you're going to have people wrestling with problems with their data set. And someone might be saying, I'm trying to see, does this data suggest this thing? And I don't really know how to ask that question or how to figure that out. And then you could look at that and say, you need to do a t-test. And maybe you can point them to kind of how you do it in SPSS and give them just enough to start to try to answer that question. because that's going to get them to the point where they can answer the question, which moves them along. And they may not actually at that point understand why a t-test works or why a t-test was the right thing to choose in that moment. But then that's something that you can maybe follow up on later, either in those group projects, as they're doing a group project about a t-test, let's say, they'll have this experience of like, oh, that was actually helpful. I got a pointer and I didn't really know why I was doing it, but I got this answer that I wanted. And so I know the value of this thing intrinsically. And so I'm a little bit more engaged, in this group as we're doing this. And as the group is working together on this contrived but messy t-test problem, I can contribute and say, oh yeah, when I did my t-test on my data that was messy in this other way, I found this or I found that. And other people might have similar things that they can contribute.
Yeah, so you have now a wider variety of experiences with t-tests that maybe bump into each other in useful ways. And you've probably increased motivation and increased long-term retention as a result of doing this very personal experience.
Right. And this is the sort of thing that there always seems to be a lot of resistance to, which is like, well, you can't, if you have your messy data, you're coming in and you need to do a t-test to answer some question. It's like, well, we can't let you do that until you understand what a t-test is. And so we have to start from the basics, and we have to get you through this basic lecture of like what a t-test is in this very contrived, very simple, dumbed down case, and then make sure you understand that before we turn you loose on this interesting problem that you actually care about. And I think that's backwards. I think you can give someone the interesting, messy problem and give them this t-test tool or whatever tool it is. And even if they don't understand what it is or why it works or anything, like it gives them an answer, and that's satisfying. And then that provides that motivation that you kind of fill that in afterwards.
Beware the gravity towards bloodletting.
By week 3, I'm just going to be given dry lectures. I'm actually going to do bloodletting while lecturing. Like literal bloodletting will be happening in the room.
No, but seriously though, like I think what you're feeling there is that it's not towards lectures. You're not going to be the one like lecturing up front, but insofar as there's a spectrum here between literal bloodletting and let people run free with 16 individual projects, I hear a little bit of a pull towards structure, and structure is good. But I'm suspicious because I know the natural tendency is always pulling towards one end of that spectrum, and every segment on it has its own narrative for why it's better. Even if the picture you paint me of like, oh no, we really do need these like more structured, like simpler data sets if we're really going to go in there before we can let them deal with the ones that their professors gave them. I think that should be resisted a little bit. And I think every time you hear that little voice in your head saying, I don't really want to let them have this total mess out there. And what if they ask me a question and I don't really know how to handle it because like, well, their data is super messy and this is a lot of state I would have to load into my mind. That's the feeling of, I have a lot of really motivated students here, right?
Yeah, there's no lack of that. So you guys are pushing me away from structure, and I think in a positive way. How would you structure the class? Would you walk in and say, hey, you saw a video where we did t-tests, correlations, scatter plots, merging of files, and looking for duplicate identifiers? You now have those somewhat in your arsenal. Take your data set, start to analyze things. Maybe you can find places where those things come up. Maybe you encounter other problems. Call me over if you do, and we can talk about what techniques you might want to learn for those problems. And go for it. This hour and 20 minutes is yours. I want you working on some sort of data project in SPSS. But aside from that, this time is yours to do as much as you can positive with it.
Here's what I would do. I would, before each class, have a segment of the videos you want them to have watched. And for each video, have a warm-up question, basically a question that would test whether or not they watched it. And a couple days before, you email them with the list of videos and the list of warm-up questions and say, like, you hand these in at the start. It's not a grade or anything like that, but this is just the thing that I expect. And then they come in first 30 minutes, you're doing some kind of structured activity. They're in the groups of 4 like they want to be. Not much longer than that, if it was me. And then I imagine there is a segment of students who don't actually have their own data set. Maybe all of them do.
No, there is.
Yeah. So then after that 30-minute point, you're like, all right, we got 2 different cohorts. Those who have something they want, their own data set, they came to this class to know how to deal with. Now is your time to run with it, ask questions. If it's applicable, work with each other. And then another cohort that basically is going to do the more complicated version of what those first 30 minutes was. All the while, you've got the potential videos that might be relevant, either the ones that they should have watched into that or the ones following kind of on deck and people know where to find them. And you just run with that.
Peter?
I almost have a different, completely sort of backwards way of maybe approaching it, which I have no idea if it would work. I've never tried anything like this. But maybe you have some sort of task that would work with any data set, some particular sort of test you want to run or some type of plot you want to generate, whatever the task is that you think people could be able to do. And you start with that. You say, hey, we're here in class. You've got your data set. If you don't, here's one you can borrow. Run this test or answer this question or plot this data in this way. And then you kind of turn people loose. And maybe you have some resources. You have a set of links or something they could look at, or maybe you do have some videos that would help them. But you more or less turn them loose. And perhaps some of them are going to be lost or need some pointers. And that's where you can kind of intervene and help, or they can work in groups to kind of answer each other's questions. But they could sort of try to do that thing. But the thing is that they'd be doing the same things. Mm-hmm. Their goal would be they'd all do some sort of t-test on their data, let's say, or they'd all do some particular sort of plot on their data. So it need to be sort of general enough concept that would apply to most things. And I imagine maybe after the first part of that, they would all kind of get to a point where they've maybe got an answer of some sort. They might not quite know how they got there, because I think you almost want to give them enough of a grounding in how to use like SPSS, for example, to get this result that gives them a satisfying answer. It says like, this hypothesis about the data is true, or this hypothesis about the data is false, based on, you typed a bunch of things in that you didn't really understand what you were doing when you did it. But you got something satisfying from that. You got this true or false answer about this hypothesis. And so that, I think, is sort of a hook that gives you like, oh, there's some power to these tools. I don't really understand what happened, but I do understand, like, I typed all this stuff and I got this answer. Then I think you could go into either a more contrived group project where you do expect deeper understanding to occur. Maybe there's additional questions they have to answer along the way to kind of show that they not only are able to sort of do the thing, but that they also understand what's happening as they're doing it. And then maybe that scaffolds to some videos that you ask them to watch after that does a more rigorous treatment.
So what I'm hearing you say is there's this natural tendency to want to start with simple and go to harder. But you love the motivation of the deep context first, and then clarifying that fog as time moves on.
Right, because I think you can do really interesting, deep things as a novice and not really know why it works or how it's working. But that's a very satisfying thing. But then it only becomes more beautiful as you see more of the why, and that entices you along. And so I guess what I'm suggesting is maybe there's a way to create that kind of path.
Right.
So you talked a little last time, Stenhaug, about how struggle is needed for learning. You come up against these things that you don't really know. And you're saying, well, a lot of times if it's just trying to deal with 2 hours to get the software to work, that's not helpful in any way. I think your role here can be, you're like sniffing out and you're looking around like, where's the unproductive struggle? Where's the unproductive struggle? And like you get to be there and facilitate and remove that when it's there. But otherwise, you're letting people engage with things that are a little above their pay grade, right? A little above what they can actually do in that moment. I'm actually reminded of one of the bits of feedback we got on Reddit when someone was talking about their response to episode 3 we did, where he was talking about learning how to build a quadcopter as this extremely motivating thing for digging into hundreds of hours of YouTube's videos worth of material to learn, what parts do you have to get? Like, how do you program it? How do you get them to work together? Things like that. And his underlying point here was just because he had this thing that was much harder than he could actually do at the beginning on the top of his mind, he just got so much more out of all of those videos and all of that was happening. And I think probably more so in a way than if someone said, quadcopter, that might be a little heavy to start with. Like, we're going to give you simpler tasks that really help build up to that and like build the foundations. I have no doubt that he had a lot of points where it was like very hard, but where someone like you probably could have made his process more efficient, and I'm just speculating, I don't know what his process was. Maybe there was some time when he just got the totally wrong components and they could never work together, and it took hours to really discover that. And it would have been much more helpful if there was an expert there saying, before you buy that one, like actually you need it to have this add-on. So seek unproductive struggle and let that be where your focus is. That's sort of how I would respond there.
I love the vision of me walking around the room. Maybe I'm on all fours and I'm just smelling. Is that automatic? That's not. Is that, are you okay? Is that unproductive? And I'm just. I really, really, really like that.
Hey, no, sniff is a vivid term. We try to spell out these things. I don't know.
Yeah, I think over the course of the podcast, one of the takeaways is that my intuition leans much more in the scaffolding from simple to difficult while keeping the learner engaged and guided as the optimal learning experience. And your guys' intuition much more is on the end of going the opposite direction.
I mean, also, you're the one that's grounded in reality here. What's cool about this is that you're actually doing this, and we can kind of follow up on how this goes later.
Yeah.
Peter and I get to be here like, la, 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 this is what I think you should do. But at all points, you think, oh, crap, what would actually happen if I did that? So I would trust your intuitions more than I trust mine.
That might be a blessing or a curse.
Yeah.
Like, we don't know, right?
Yeah, reality is definitely something that I am completely ignoring in this case because I'm looking to my own experience. When I want to learn something, it's because I want to do something, and usually, I don't know, for whatever reason, I choose these really ambitious things I have no idea how to do, and then I'm sort of throw myself in and try to find my way. And I was like, well, that should work for everyone. It's great, right?
Yeah. Maybe another reason not to trust our intuitions. Either I don't know how representative you are of most people trying to learn things.
I guess my hypothesis, though, is that there's no reason why people can't be like that or can't learn like that. Like, there's nothing special about me, I wouldn't think. I think there's a mindset about, I believe that I can learn something. That might be where people are their own worst enemy, is they have this model of, well, I can't learn something unless I take a class, and then a class works this way. And I think that might be one of the challenges, Stenhaug, that you run into, is you go into the class and you say, here's how this is going to go. And everyone kind of looks at you and you're like, wait a minute, you're a terrible teacher. This isn't how, where's my lecture?
There's definitely a risk in that. There's no doubt about that.
What you got to do, I guess I can't say day one, but day two, you walk in there, giant letters on the whiteboard. You write be an eater, and you don't explain it. And you just let that sit there in the back of the room for the entirety of session number 2 and just, let it subconsciously do what it does.
So there's something related that I think is interesting. So far, I've focused on, if I'm not going to be doing the lecturing, what's my role? And my role, I've focused on creating resources. Maybe that's misguided. So I've created YouTube videos, and then I've created these exercises and these activities with varying degrees of scaffolding and guidance. Maybe that's misguided. Maybe because I want them to be able to Google and figure it out from some random professor at the University of Minnesota Duluth screenshot page of SPSS. I want them to be able to figure it out by someone else's YouTube videos, because I'm not going to always make it for their perfect context.
I was most excited about like the resources that you were going to create. Like, I think that,
oh, you like that?
Even if others do exist, and again, this is kind of something we talked about before, that's the way that you're going to own it. Otherwise, you don't want to run the risk of flying in blind, not knowing what to do with those first 30 minutes, or running a little bit dry, or having them be less productive. I'm sure it's going to be super hard and like crazy time consuming for you, but I see huge value in you being the one to create those resources. Because like, I don't think you need to be worried that, oh, they're going to be suddenly reliant on only knowing how to learn from my resources and not like Googling for other things, because you will not create the internet's worth of things and you will not answer all of the questions. So I don't see that as a worry at all.
Yeah, it's almost like I'm kind of playing the boss. If you can learn from my resources, you can learn from any resource.
Maybe that's the right approach.
So I think this is an example of the idea that planning is everything, but plans are nothing, which is, this idea, the act of making the plans and thinking through how you would scaffold something is valuable because it gives you this idea. You've sort of thought of all the edge cases and the eventualities that may or may not happen. But having those plans and then sticking to them and executing them is kind of foolish because you don't know what's going to happen when you walk into that classroom.
Yeah. The relevant quote that I was trying to pull, which I'm just going to shoehorn in because it's one of my favorite quotes and I have lots of them, is that no war is won according to plan, but no wars are won without one.
We might be quoting the same thing. Some general said that somewhere.
Okay. I have something I'm excited to talk about. Here's my fear. Oftentimes, when people don't get sufficient data science guidance or training and they Google for their solutions, they end up in this world where they copy and paste a lot of code, edit it in order to serve their purpose, but don't ever become the fluent person that can just write syntax or actually knows the functions by heart.
Yes, but that's where you start.
So you start with the copy and the paste, and then how do you get to the fluent? Because I see so many people stuck in I copy the Stack Overflow code. I don't really know what it does. I think that part does that thing, but I'm not really sure.
I think you need a forcing function for them to remove components of it that aren't needed, or like make it their own, tweak it, edit it. You give them a challenge. Hey, are there any lines in here that are irrelevant to your use case? If you're learning on your own, right, and you're kind of like going from Stack Overflow on these things, every time you copy paste, go through it line by line and try to tweak it and see if you understand what each line is doing, which requires intrinsic motivation. And you have to push yourself to do that, because usually the reason you're copy pasting is like, I was trying to get this other thing to work and I don't have time for this. So to the extent that you can provide that forcing function as the educator, that, hey, whenever you find yourself copy pasting, we're going to go through that one by one. We're going to understand what each part of this is doing and maybe even try to rewrite it so that it's better, because that post wasn't the best possible answer.
Yeah, but sometimes it doesn't really matter that you understand it.
Well,
I mean, like, this is where I was sort of like going with, you should start there. You should start by copying and pasting and just jamming whatever you need to into the thing to make something work and get an answer that you want, because that's a useful skill and it's useful to know that you can do that. And so starting the class there as like, here's your data, try to answer this question on it, and then run around on your hands and knees sniffing for people headed down the wrong path and point them on the right path. But step two is, after they've done that, then you have a little bit more of a scaffolded discussion. So then you give them a more contrived problem that maybe still has some messy bits, and they work in groups to solve that thing together. And there they're bringing in all of the different things that, if you have 4 different people in that group and they've all done this messy thing and didn't really understand what was going on, they may not have understood what was going on, but they did each individually observe different pieces of it. And when they come together and try to solve something together, each of them are going to kind of bring their perspective and say, oh, I noticed this, and I think it might work this way. And someone else will say, no, I tried this other thing and it didn't work that way, and it actually works this way. And like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. And they have those kind of discussions, and that's where some deeper learning is going to happen. So you don't just throw people in and say, you're on your own. Here's Google. Maybe I'll point you in the right direction from time to time, but otherwise you're on your own, because then you do end up with people who just, they copy and paste and they don't know why it works.
Just to back up a little bit, I do think the image of when the 4 people come together, they're all like each bringing a little piece of the puzzle that they observed, I think that's a little starry-eyed unless there's some facilitation. The natural tendency is like one of the people kind of owns it, and the other 3, they're like, I don't really know what's going on, but this guy seems to have it, so I guess we'll kind of ride with that.
Yeah, that's fair.
And that's a problem to be addressed, and it's a solvable thing. But if you just leave things to their own devices, what you'll end up with is 3 people who are getting the same effect of copy pasting code in the form of either copying what the other person's typing or letting them take the wheel. And this is the thing with all group projects. Different people have different perspectives on the value of group projects in school, but I do think without a little bit of facilitation or a little bit of a forcing function that like each individual owns it, it's not going to happen on its own.
Yeah.
A couple of thoughts. The one thing that we're fighting here, and we haven't talked explicitly about, but I think is fascinating research, is Ken Kadinger at Carnegie Mellon did some actual estimating of what percentage of learning things like this are conscious in the expert's mind, and found that 70% of the sort of stuff that you would do in this process is tacit knowledge, or knowledge that the expert can't tell you they have, but it's knowledge that you need in order to get the task done.
What types of processes are you talking about? I'm not sure I follow.
So I'm not entirely sure exactly the context and the research happened in, but it would be, for example, if you take an SPSS expert and you say, hey, we want you to tell us exactly step by step everything you would need to tell a learner in order to do something complicated. And they'll think for a really long time, and they'll give you all of the information they would have to know. And the estimate is that 70% of the stuff, like, they're going to miss.
I think a great example of this is, either one of you, tell me, if you are driving down the highway, you've got your hands on the wheel, and you want to change lanes to the right, what do your hands do?
All right, left hand turns on the turn signal. I'm going to let it go for at least 3 seconds. I'm looking in my rear view mirrors. I guess that's not my hands, but whatever. You've got to look in your right mirror, see if there's someone there. You've got to do the over the shoulder. Part of that, you put your hand on the back of the right seat while you're looking over. Then you use your left hand to slowly rotate while holding the wheel at the 10 o'clock position, about pi 12ths radians in the clockwise direction. And then you're looking over your shoulder while that happens, you're looking in front of you, and then once your car's in the other lane, you turn in another pi 12 radians in the counterclockwise direction, and signal automatically goes off. And I think that's all your hands have to do.
Yeah, and you just veered clear off the road because you turn pi 12 radius to the right, so now your car is pointed to the right.
Okay.
And continuing to turn to the right, so you're now in an arc to the right.
Okay.
And then you straighten the wheel out. And so now you straighten out and you're going straight and veered off.
Oh, you're totally right. Man, I walked into that. I was so confident. I was like, I got this. Like, what possible example could you be building to? Okay.
Yeah. And so I think that's, a great example of, you're an expert there, but you don't necessarily know how to describe it.
Man, that's a rock solid example.
Eater, that is why we pay you the big bucks, to come up with examples like that. Okay, here's what I want to do with you guys. I think this would be an amazing experience for us three, and I think it would be an amazing podcast content creation. I think this would just be, we need to live our lives like this. As a teacher, being a good teacher seems to be this mysterious art. You have these good teachers in your school, and you're not really sure what they do when the doors close that's making them a good teacher. They tell you a few things. It's kind of like this example where a bunch of it must be tacit, or you're not sure what's going on. And so there's a bunch of startup ideas where, we're going to release videos of teachers giving exemplar lessons. And so now you can maybe pay, or maybe you can find them on YouTube now or Vimeo or something, and you can see these all-star lessons. But still there's something missing because there's a rapport that's been built with the students that you don't see. There's the resource was created in a way you didn't see. You're still not seeing all of it. What I want to do with you guys is I want to teach, I don't know, should we teach data science or should we teach programming, or we'll teach something. But us three, we're going to corral 25 students and we're going to meet with them every day. And we're going to record everything. We're going to mic up each student. We're going to mic us up. We're going to screen capture anytime we're preparing lessons or anything. And we're going to make a feature-length documentary of the entire process of teaching a class and everything that goes into it. And we're going to go from awful, miserable to great. And we're going to have everything documented so everyone can see that struggle, tacit knowledge, and all. You in?
I was so excited because I thought you were going to put out a realistic project. I'm like, it might be something we can discuss. That sounds like a lot of effort. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that. The idea of corralling 25 students from somewhere and like getting all of the equipment and time commitment necessary to like actually record this. I'm not saying we shouldn't. I'm just saying I really don't have the thought or bandwidth to like actually make that happen anytime soon.
One of us is at an educational research institution studying education.
Yeah, can you make this happen?
Do you know anyone?
Let me just think. Yeah. As a matter of fact, that may or may not be me. So I can do it. You guys can do it.
Here's the thing. Any sort of actual in the real world teaching stuff that you do and you kind of want to discuss here, I think that's awesome. I'll be as much a part of that as I am willing to devote some time to, but you're going to be the one taking the reins, I think, for anything even close to the image you have.
So my dream of us winding up in a classroom, us three with students, and thinking through together what we're going to do, and then seeing what's happened and reacting to that, and then conversing about that on a podcast or in documentation or something. I think that'd be really cool. I don't know if it's that realistic anytime soon. We're all really busy and have a lot of stuff going on. I would even have to make room in my schedule for an experience like that, even though I am in the research institution. But can we at least grant that would be a pretty cool experience where we'd get to test a lot of the assumptions that we're creating as we're creating this podcast?
Yeah, I mean,
that would be pretty awesome.
Again, I'm with you on the intent. So let's make some form of that happen. If you find yourself with a classroom full of students, you want to teach something, and you'll ring me up on some day and say, hey, like, this is what we're doing. This is the time I expect of you. I'm probably going to be on board. I'm probably going to do it. But again, ball is in your court.
Cool. I'll keep planning.
But I'm excited. I'm excited. I mean, I'm also excited just about this thing that you're teaching because it's dramatically less abstract than what we've talked about before. And we can actually come back and be like, hey, Grant, that thing you suggested, that was absolutely horrible. And like the class was in utter disarray. We actually have an opportunity to push back based on pragmatism here.
Yeah, I am excited to take this conversation and tweak some things and try some things and follow up with how it went. I'll have to listen back to it and figure out which parts you were sincere. I couldn't tell if you wanted me to actually write either on the board or not. So I'm gonna have to listen back and just try to judge sincerity.
I want to be as clear as I possibly can that was a 100% serious recommendation.
Gotcha. I'll do that Tuesday then.
Be an eater. I bet some of your students listen to this podcast. I bet they'll know what that means.
I hope and believe not.
Terrifying.
Terrifying. The other thought is how isolating the creation of a classroom and thinking about these things is. How many teachers have the experience of sitting down with two friends and just brainstorming and thinking through the overall general structure of their classroom? I would guess that's fairly rare and a super valuable practice as opposed to just going on in the background of your mind while you're showering and doing other activities. So it's cool that we had the opportunity to do this podcast or no podcast. So thanks for taking the time on that.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's really cool. And I think it's even cooler that we're going to hear how this works out.
Yeah, excited to hear that. Maybe next time, maybe the time after, given how infrequent these are, but I'm excited.
So what's interesting, I don't think I highlighted this enough, but SPSS, I have an SPSS and a Stata class, and they alternate Tuesdays. So I still have SPSS day one.
Okay, cool. So...
Or I still have Stata day one, excuse me. But yes, I have a whole new course.
We get regular updates. Awesome.
Do you want to read that note from our sponsors, Grant, or do you want me to?
Oh, you go for it. I have no idea what you're talking about.
Thank you to SPSS, Stata, R, Hadley, Wickham, and the Stanford School of Education for sponsoring this podcast. We could not make this possible without patrons like you.
Oh, man. I had no idea where that was going. That's great. That's hilarious.
Cool. So we just released a couple episodes with a different style. One talking more about education, one kind of just us talking about stuff. And we got some feedback. I don't know if you all read that.
Yeah, I mean, I tried to take the time to go through lots of things on the Reddit, several things on the YouTubes, various tweets, things like that. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I read through most of the stuff on the Reddit. I think the one thing that jumped out at me on the YouTube was there were a lot more comments on episode 3 than there were on episode 4. So just in terms of a number that you want to put to something, people seem to feel like they had more to say about episode 3, which I guess makes sense. We maybe talked about more substantive things in episode 3.
There's kind of something for people to offer us opinion directly on.
What was funny to me is, like, insofar as that was the case with episode 4, where like people were talking on something substantive, it was because we were talking about productivity and getting things done. And it occurs to me that the very kind of person who is going to prefer a structured format to something a little bit more random, the one topic they're going to actually enjoy that we happen to randomly stumble upon is the systematism of GTD and all of that. And that's where all of those comments seem to be oriented around.
There did seem to be a lot of people interested in that.
So what would we have to talk to make the audience of 4 like really happy? What's a really unsystematic, kind of free-flowing, just kind of out there activity?
If we're talking just like free-flowing, it's almost like a diary of your day would be that, which would also be very boring to listen to, at least if you have the kind of days that I do.
I think the GTD fans would kind of enjoy Stenhaug's day.
That's true. I would enjoy actually a diary of Stenhaug's day, to be honest.
Maybe love life. Maybe knowing the intimate details of our love lives would really hit the folks that enjoy the free-flowing conversation of episode 4.
That's true. It's a little like in any kind of sitcom or any kind of TV series, you need sexual tension just because there is like 15% of the population that won't watch a show without it. So we're really losing out if we don't have some sort of little undercurrent sexual tension behind the scenes of this show that pops up now and then. In seriousness, though, as far as the direction, what we do in the future on here, I have my own thoughts, but what is your takeaway looking at everything that people have written?
I mean, my takeaway was that a lot of people really did seem to enjoy the talk about education, but it seemed like the feedback, such that it was kind of like they wanted it to be a little bit less, I don't know, a little less dense, maybe. I think I saw that feedback a few times, that people who did enjoy episode 3 treated it as a bit of a chore to listen to.
Yeah, it's funny to me because that feedback came in 2 different forms. Those who were like, episode 3 was more dense, and therefore I preferred it. And others were like, it was more dense. And, I only listen to podcasts while doing something else. And, I like to be able to lose focus now and then. And it's like the opposite of YouTube, right? Where you kind of want to not be that informative or not like come at it with some mission of like, this is the thing that as a bit of knowledge you're going to come away with at the end of this episode.
But that's what I want to do.
Well, I mean, you've got lots of wisdom to share, Eater, so you can be the wisdom provider and just keep the 2 rambunctious kids here in line from time to time.
I'll do what I can.
Grant and I'll add the empty space and you can be the mass, and there we can have like a kind of an averaged out density.
Yeah, that seems perfect, right? Like ratio 1/3 of wisdom, 2/3 shenanigans.
I got your shenanigans.
You're setting expectations far too high.
So personally, I think you can't stop us from talking about education. If we just got on every day with 0 preparation, which is not what we'll do, but like if we did, conversations would inevitably go towards education.
I was thinking the same thing. Just, I mean, Grant, you and I had dinner the other night, and I think we spent 3 hours talking about education.
Yeah. And I mean, that's just literally what we spend our days on in like various shapes and forms, whether that's Stenhaug's PhD, my videos, or like Khan Academy and your videos. That's just top of mind 24/7. And we talk about what we do. So, hey, that's just what's going to happen.
That's what you're going to get.
Yeah, so try to stop us, guys. Try to stop us.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I think the episode 3, the structure was good. The talking about education is welcome. Maybe we can lose a little bit of density by being a little more informal and shenanigan-y, which we got to episode 4. So a nice little blend of the both of them.
Improv games. I think just like randomly inserted improv games.
Some of my friends that listened said you were just an absolute elite improv mind, Grant, and you were showing that off at the end of episode 4.
I don't know. I enjoyed improv when I took it, and I feel like I would probably live a happier life if I did more things with that. It's weird. Like, there's a dynamic when you're a college student that makes it nice just because you're in an environment of other college students. But I feel somehow weird about like in-college improv, you know what I mean? Like either it should be professional or it's going to be some super awkward thing that's like filled with people who are looking for something to do post-retirement.
I'm not with you at all. I'm having some people over for a fire tomorrow night. I want you guys both to come, and I'm going to try to play improv games, and I don't care what people say.
Back up a second. You're having some people come over for a fire?
Uh-huh. Not arson related.
Well, that explains everything.
I don't get what's unclear here, but I'm excited to find out.
What I have in mind is something paganistic, like you're just sitting around a large fire, staring into it and admiring the gods that have brought it to you.
All of the ideas I had about what you're talking about kind of vanished when you said it wasn't arson related.
Where are the people from the cornfields? You guys didn't grow up and just at 4 nights out of the week in the summer, you sit around a fire with family, sing Kumbaya, and make s'mores?
I can honestly say no. And I can honestly express some jealousy there.
Oh, man. We got to get up to the great northern Minnesota area and just do that straight for a week.
Is this what you do in Minnesota when you have nothing else to do?
No, it's when you have everything to do and you choose it over that. It's beautiful.
All right. I grew up in a place with like mountains and real activities, but sure. We'll like sing around fires.
Oh, man. I feel offended. You've never... So when I say we're going to get together for a fire, that's an absurd construct to you? Are you kidding me?
It's like saying we're going to get together for a tree. It's like, I know what a tree is, and I can picture standing around one.
Oh, hey, everybody in the comments, all you Midwesterners, I need you to come out. Sodak, Nodak, Iowa, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, all my fire lovers, non-arson related, I need you out here with me because these guys don't get it.
All right, we'll do that. I'll let you know how it goes.
So I have to admit, I did spend my summers growing up in northern Michigan, and I am aware that fires are a thing that people did. I think I led the sort of childhood where I was like more interested in tinkering with things and staying inside and doing boring things.
You mean you didn't want to like go out there and figure out the underlying chemistry of the fire by like breaking it apart and trying to burn different fuel sources?
Well, I did get fireworks and take them apart and make bigger fireworks from them. And
of course you did.
But no, the bonfire thing, like bonfires on the beach, that sort of thing, that was all the cool kids, and I was never really part of that.
Either I feel like you're coming at this from a reasonable perspective of some people do some things, others don't. Grant, you're just straight hating on it.
I'm not hating, I'm just calling it weird. Weird is fine, weird is good, but in my mind, it's very unusual.
It's funny because why I told you that was because the fire was the normal thing to do, and then I was kind of breaking to you that I was going to do improv in addition to the fire, and you guys got so hooked on the fire that the improv couldn't be further from your mind.
Well, you said a sentence that made no sense.
Real quick, can I just say, like, thanks to everybody who actually provided all of that feedback. I found a certain heartwarmingness in reading that because, I don't know, I have this sense that there's a lot of people who are like looking out for the podcast and kind of want it to succeed. And it's the same sort of heartwarming, like welling up of affection that comes inside me when I think about like the audience of my videos or like read comments and such, where it just brings me such pleasure and delight that there's a number of people who care about similar things or like want it to succeed. And you can't always express that over the internet in a really nice way. Reading through some of those, not necessarily for the specifics they were saying, but just for the fact that like people seemed invested in the future of these episodes. I love that. I love that.
Yeah, well said, Grant. Thank you for the people that care about the success of this podcast and have contributed their thoughts. Appreciate that.
And I found it remarkable how much some people wrote. It was always surprising. I'd click on a Reddit comment and there'd just be this wall of text. And it's like, wow, you've really thought very deeply about this and have strong opinions. And you probably even listened to the episodes. which is still
Yeah.
shocking to me.
No, we got listeners. We got people who care. This is good. It's growing. Also, I'll probably give a proper follow-up on implementation of getting things done and productivity and everything once there's been enough time to actually say something there. But just Stenhaug, real quick, I've started doing the notion of having a regular task list that you put things in whenever you think, and then you come and organize every day and offload your mind. At least so far.
Mm-hmm.
Again, can't speak until we're well into the future. Feels great. There's just so many times in my mind I feel like I say, I should blank. And whenever that happens, just the notion that it goes somewhere that will be handled and actually being able to stay focused on other things, very obvious thing in hindsight, but just very appreciative that you kind of pushed me towards making that happen.
So you think it's benefiting you, one, in your probability of doing the actual thing, and then two, in your non-stressing about holding the idea in your mind?
Mostly the second, because it's never that I would worry about things ultimately happening. Things would happen because they're important. The problem is because they're important and because I know they need to happen, it's just this permanent buzz.
Yeah.
I think it's just partly like I don't deal with enough people. I work independently. So it's not the case that I'm like you as the 22-year-old teacher dealing with 75 different things in the head. So it never came to this crashing point.
Mm-hmm.
But even if it's not crashing the system, it can still like occupy much more of the CPU than you want.
One question I have that I think is interesting. Do you have, maybe I'll make it as a statement, have your reaction. I feel as though I have a probability in my head, a mean probability of the chance that any given person that tells me they're going to do something is actually going to do it. So for some people, it's near one. And if that person tells me something's going to happen, whether they're going to send me a restaurant they had talked about or do some data analysis or do something, that probability is very high. And then there are other people that have just over the course of time lost all credibility. And this seems associated to that.
Feel you 100%. I would bet that you can tie the high probabilities to people that have some kind of system in place like this. Ah, man, there's one in particular that when you talk about like totally losing credibility, the person I'm corresponding with right now when it comes to the delicious, delicious plushy pie creatures that will come, it's just the slowest turnaround and like things are dropped and forgotten about in ways that does not need to happen. And it's taken me a while to properly register. This is someone you need to poke like 3 or 4 times to make something happen. So I feel you 100%.
This is too strong of a statement, but I'm going to make it anyways. They become almost less human to me. They become almost a shell of a human being just because they're just not like, there's nothing there because it's all just powder puff and BS and pretending stuff's gonna happen. Why are we having this conversation? You're just telling me lies.
Wait, hang on. To you, humanity is a matter of whether or not people do what they say they will. Like it's not, the jokes that you're making or the way they make you feel when you're hanging out together or if they're supportive and generally on your side. It's just purely, do they actually follow through?
I mean, I can't say yes to that, but there's something about a person that just looks me in the eyes and tells me lies over and over again that seems I feel less connected in the human way that I like to feel connected with other human beings because I feel no trust and no same pageness. I feel it's just living in different worlds.
It is oddly disrespectful in a way, right? Someone is saying something that they think they're being nice to you. They're saying, yes, I can do that. I can do that. And they probably mean it in the moment. Like, yes, I do want to do that because I do value you as another human being and you want this thing and I can do it for you. And so I'm going to say that I'm going to do it for you. But somewhere they know like, well, I'm really busy and I don't actually have time. And so in a way, it's like they're trying to be respectful. They're trying to be nice to you, but it is really very disrespectful.
Yeah.
I've got a question, Stenhaug. Be frank with me here. I feel like that probably could describe me a lot of times. Did you ever have this sense in interactions with me or like, I don't know, I can't think of times I'm like telling you I will do something, but what was the probability in your head towards me in this respect?
Your probability, because it would make incredible audio to have this moment where I tell you that the probability is 0.4 and I literally, for every 10 things you tell me, I just check off 4 and hope that's what I get. You've been very consistent and very positive. We had talked about starting the podcast. You followed up on that and made that happen.
I feel like you're the one that kind of followed up on that, to be honest. I feel like I was just going to let that sit and not really do anything, but you brought it up enough other times that it's like, oh, all right, we should probably pull this together.
I can say from my perspective, Grant, you were driving this.
Yeah. I think I maybe originally talked to you, Grant, and then the times we'd hang out, I'd bring it up over and over again to plant seeds, but it grew in your backyard.
All right. Well, I think all credit is to be spread out precisely evenly in this case.
I mean, it doesn't matter because you and I are buffoons, Grant, and then Eater comes and actually has something interesting to put on the podcast.
We have the expert on the panel here to help de-buffoonify. This was the ultimate intent.
You're just continuing to bury me with these expectations. This is not fair. Well, Ben Eater again to close things out. And I have to say, this podcast really has been a team effort. But, an unexpected member of that team has been our listeners. It's been really quite amazing to read all the feedback we've gotten. It's neat that there are so many people who seem really invested in our success and have given us really thoughtful feedback and ideas and so forth. I mentioned before that I'm personally really excited that Stenhaug is teaching a class right now. It means that Grant and I can come up with all these crazy ideas and stuff for him to try out in the classroom, and we can find out how it goes over the next couple of months. But that's also an opportunity for you to share your thoughts and perspectives and feedback and be a part of that as well. So I'd love it if you had any thoughts or on anything we talked about, or really any feedback or advice about the podcast. Head over to the subreddit and let us know. We'll put some links to that in the description. And if you like, you can also really help us by subscribing on iTunes or YouTube or, I don't know, SoundCloud, Stitcher. Is that a thing? I guess look for anything that says Ben and Blue and has a subscribe button next to it, and maybe try clicking that. That'll probably help us somehow. Apparently also leaving a rating or review on iTunes really helps people find new podcasts like us. So if you've got a moment, drop us a review on iTunes. And also don't forget, there's a couple rough around the edges sort of bonus episodes that we've got that we made early on as we were experimenting. Those are over on Patreon. So if you want to listen to a couple bonus episodes, head over to Patreon and check that out. All the links and everything are in the show notes.